Before we start, I'd like to ask you to open to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11 to 15. And let me give you some time as you're opening. I'll tell you a little bit about this discussion. I'd like to request that this discussion be an open discussion. I know we are in church, but nobody is going to judge you for your openness. There is no perfect answer. There is no one answer. That is why we have a big panel. There is no one person with the correct answer. We just want to find out what are some of the challenges we face and what are some of the solutions. And as I was thinking about this topic, as a woman, I was thinking about the experiences that I've had as a woman. And if there's one place where I've been hurt the most, is actually the church. And so this discussion is very important that we are having it in this church. And the theme of this church is to grow deep and wide. And so my challenge for you is, as we are looking to go deeper, discussing an issue that is a challenge in this nation, look deeply inside yourself. Check yourself. This is not going to be a debate of the sexes. This is not going to be about pointing fingers. If you're going to be a solution to this nation, the answers that we need, the change you want to see, comes from you. So take time to check yourself. Ask the Holy Spirit to do a surgery on you, so that by the time we are done with this topic, you see things as God does. And by the time you're leaving this dome, make a decision that you will not live as the same person, but you will live as a solution and an answer for this nation. And for some of you who have been called for the nations, you will be an answer for the nations. So let me start by reading 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11 to 15. And just a warning, tempers shouldn't rise after I finish this. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. Verse 12, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. This is Paul writing. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Faith. We just read about faith. Reverend Faith. I'm sure you can recite this verse without looking at the Bible. No. You can't. You haven't been taught. But how many times has this verse been thrown at you and people told you what kind of person you should be in church?
Good morning, church. So I don't know how candid I need to be here.
Very.
Especially because people sit in this congregation see me in a particular way. And I've realized that as a minister and as a pastor, when we share from weaknesses, people somehow distinct the struggles of others who are not in ministry from those who are in ministry. But the truth about it is our struggles for those women who are sitting here and for each one of you who's sitting on the congregation is the same, except it's seen differently. How many times has this verse been thrown at me? I want to say it has never been thrown at me as a verse, but every way of communicating, whether it being in the context of ministry, in the context of a boardroom setting, in the context of being invited into a discussion or conversation, sometimes even innocuously, in the context of just staff team, where I can tell you for sure that when we have a board meeting, with the executive team leaders, and mostly, of course, the people in high-level church positions are mostly men. And one of the assumptions is usually that as we have finished a discussion and it's tea break, we assume we are all taking a break, okay? But I have found out that and it's not, I don't think it's malicious or intentional, that every time we've gone and come back after 45 minutes of a break or half an hour of a break, the conversation moved on with the men. Because they went and they were in their men corner, just doing their own men thing, and somehow there was a solution to a problem we were doing here. So they come back, and they're several steps ahead of me.
Yes.
Because I wasn't part of their conversation. And I can tell you one of the dynamics, one of the big things that has separated churches is this conversation. Should women be leaders, spiritual leaders in the context of church? And there are generally two theological stands on this one. There's what is called a complementarian stand. And a complementarian stand acknowledges that men and women are equal, except they have different giftings. And they have different roles that they play, whether it's been their home or it been marriage, in marriage or in church. And there are several people around the world, globally, this is a global conversation, that have very strong stands.
Yes.
So much so that if a church moves from a complementarian space to what is called, the opposite of that is egalitarian. And egalitarian means, whereas we recognize that men and women are equal in a way, we also recognize that there is no distinction with the same sex, the gender roles. There is no distinction. That each sex can play the same roles in whatever space. They can lead a church. They can be ordained. They can be ministers. They can get the titles of reverend and bishop, etc. And so the church has generally globally been divided on those grounds. Should women be leaders in the church? Should they not? And because of those stands, I've especially gone into the Western context, which I found very interesting, where they talk, they're all about women's rights, etc. But in the context of a church setting, I've been ushered out of a boardroom, where they have said it is time for us to talk about church planting. Wow. Does the lady need to leave the room right now? When we are talking about training leaders, that's one of the biggest things. Should we be training women or not training women? And we've had some of our partner churches step back and say, if you're taking an egalitarian stand, then we can't be part of this conversation. So at a personal level, it has been one of the things that I've had to wrestle with as a woman in ministry, particularly because it's a very lonely space. There are not many of us in that space. One of the things I celebrated when the Anglican Church ordained the lady bishop this year.
Yes.
I want her to be my best friend, because that is not a common role.
Yes.
And I know she has her own personal stories that she can share about how she got there. So it's one of the things that I'm cognizant about every step of the way, even as I stand on the pulpit here. Are the men hearing my message in a particular way? Are they seeing me just as a woman who has just been given a mic? Or are they seeing me as an authority, and the word that I'm sharing is a word that God has given me to change and transform their lives?
I guess the challenge is also in the church, because the church is a reflection of our society. But truly our society should, the church now actually, it needs to be the other way around, that the society does reflect the church, and that's why we're having this conversation. Honorable Martha Karua, there was a hashtag that was trending saying, "I was not taught," and this came from an interview that you had. Later on, you had an interview, I think it was with Pinky Gilani, where you said, there is no academy where women are actually taken and taught how they should behave in the society. Who is doing the teaching, and what are some of the things that you have refused to be taught?
I think the teaching is done within the family context and in the traditional setting. And the time I was raised up country, you have your aunts, uncles, and other people, granny, and other people around the compound. So you learn by instruction and by interaction. You see what people are doing. And the most powerful learning is through watching other people.
Yes.
So to ask a woman whether you were taught to be coy, I wasn't taught, and some of us are not teachable, not to that extent. Because you immediately you realize there is a differentiation between you and the males.
Yes.
You are supposed to behave in a certain way, not acceptable to you, but acceptable especially to patriarchy. And patriarchy is not just men. It grows in us. We were raised in the same setting. So you find there are women who are very patriarchal in their thinking, men the same. So it's something we have to unlearn. And we've all gone through processes. I was sharing at the back room that when I started working, having grown up hearing that women always meet to gossip, you know, men meet to do business, women to gossip. I'm posted in Nakuru as a magistrate, and I receive a letter from the business and professional women inviting me to join them. I didn't even bother to respond. I can't join a gossip club. You see, you are raised to hate yourself because I'm a woman. I'm looking down upon a woman's organization. So I also had to learn. I went to unlearn. I went through the process, through interacting with other women, and I always say that my Damascus moment came in Uganda. I went to a meeting with feeder women in Uganda, and that was my Damascus moment. And life has never been the same again. I'm full of self-love because the commandment says, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yourself, yes.
If you can't love you, you can't love others.
That's true.
So I love myself just as I am, and I love others. So my mission is to occupy my space, to safeguard my space, and also to reach out to others. So my process of unlearning is not over. It's a lifetime process because sometimes the discrimination on the basis of gender is so subtle.
Yes.
Sometimes you are left wondering whether you are oversensitive, but it is there. So we got to learn to have our antennas out. As a father, how are you raising your daughter? As a mother, how are you raising your son? We are there telling our daughters not to climb, telling our sons not to do this. My parents were not gender activists. But when I chose to run for office, my father was very supportive, my brothers, everybody in the family, because my father didn't see women. He just saw his daughter. So if this debate is contextualized within the family, we have no difficulties. I've seen people selling their best property, selling their best cow to educate their children, both males and females. I've seen people appreciate their daughters equally as their sons when they do well. But when we make it a public debate, we become different. You hear people utter such unkind things about women especially that you wonder whether they were born of mothers. And I used to tell colleagues in Parliament, and I'll still say it here, that when you utter those harsh words, it's not to me you utter them. It's to your mother, to the women around you. I'm part of that circle. So if you respect your mother, your sisters, the women closest to you, always have a thought how you react to women, how you talk to them. If you respect the men around you, the same, because you cannot choose to respect some men, not others. I may not respect your behavior or like it, but as a human being, I have to acknowledge you, to affirm you. My duty, your duty, affirm yourself every morning. God made us wonderfully, and I think I came ready just as I am. Thank you.
Amen. Another question still to you. We just watched a video where we saw the EU president in Turkey get into a meeting, and her juniors, two gentlemen, decided to sit, and she didn't have a place to sit and join in the conversation. Is that something you can relate to, and maybe if you could give us some examples?
I can relate to that, although I think Madam President was too polite. She ought to have taken a step forward and told them, excuse me, you know, so that it lives with them and they remember next time.
Yes.
Because we have to help each other and learn.
Yes.
But women are assumed so often that somebody comes in and tells you they want to see the boss. You are the boss, but they have assumed you are not the one. So you'll be asked, where is so-and-so? You see? It happens quite a number of times. And going through life, when we were doing difficult cases, early days when I was young, I overheard a police officer tell another, we were doing the treason case, approaching the court. And he whispered, but not so, whatever so I heard, that's Martha Njoka, that's the name I was going with that time, that's Martha Njoka coming, she's hard-headed, don't let her pass. What I did may not be very Christian. I just went in combat mode, hit them with my clipboard. By the time they figured out what was happening, they'd moved aside and I had passed. I needed to go to court. And I looked back and told them, shoot, because they were armed. Because they already knew I'm an advocate, I'm going to court. So the men can pass, but a woman who is assertive is hard-headed. A woman who is assertive is loud.
Yes.
A man is a good leader, is an upcoming leader. So what can we do as society to change this? How can we begin to relate to each other better? We are doubted as leaders. We are not doubted in the home. All the work can be left to us. But in leadership, we are doubted. You have a family business. You may be the prime mover in that business. But should you want to make decisions about the money, you are doubted. A woman can't walk into the home and tell the husband, I have decided to run for office. A woman has to find a roundabout way of convincing. But a man can go with both hands in his pockets and announce he is running.
Yes.
And expect support, and he will get it. So how can we begin to unlearn these things, to work on them, to recognize each other as equal human beings? Our biological roles may be different, but we are equal human beings, similar needs, emotional. We have similar abilities, sometimes better abilities, depending on how God has endowed you, because we are given different gifts. So it's a question of how do we capture this so that we utilize our full potential as families, as communities, as society. Because talent resides in both women and men.
Yes.
Let's go for it.
Yes. I like that challenge that we need to help each other and learn. Janet Mbugua, you are a celebrated news anchor, a celebrated journalist, and we've seen you growing in media. And it got to a time where we saw you step away, and it seemed like you are more passionate to issues, to deal with the challenges that women and the girl child faces. What has made you so passionate? Is there a personal experience that maybe you went through?
Thank you, Cynthia. It's always hard to speak after Honorable Martha Karua, but no. And it's really great to see you, Pastor Faith. This is, I think, my second time physically in church since the pandemic, so it's surreal, and it feels really great to be here.
Yeah.
I've been listening to what everyone has been saying, and I think even as I come towards the answer to your question, I think sometimes we need to go back to tools, because what has been mentioned here about self-love, self-actualization,
yes.
Without all of those, people don't realize it's very hard for you to push forward in your calling
yes.
if you don't have an understanding or belief in who you are.
That's
and I feel like now in my life, I've started to come back full circle to who I am. Because there's many times when I felt like I needed to be, silent or quiet. There's many times that I needed to adjust in a room to make space for a man to say something where I can't.
Yes.
I started in media really young, so there's many times I was either too young in a room, too female in a room, too pregnant to be on TV.
Yes.
I got that in 2015. I got a lot of body shaming for reading the news, and people were like, she's too pregnant. Today, till now, I don't know what that means, to be too pregnant. So there was always that there was something that you needed to adjust and conform to, and for a while, I think I I believed it and listened to it, because you realize everybody else, a lot of people around you are adjusting. But you see, when you adjust, you take away, you dim your shine, and you dim who you really want to be. And I think people need to recognize that that social normalization of everything that we're saying here, which is you don't belong in this room. When the boss walks into the room, people are sitting down because they don't recognize as the boss. Yes. It's harmful. It's changing, but it's really harmful. And it takes what you say, check yourself, and self-actualization. Yes. And I think for me, even calling myself a woman leader, I had to come to that, because I thought, okay, I'm broadcasting the news. I'm touching on social justice issues. But recognizing that that had a sphere of influence, I had to appreciate and occupy that space and not be afraid to do that. But it came with a lot of I've had so many conversations with myself. Yes. So many. And some of them I would end up having them and I'd cry and I'd sob. Other times I'd have them and I was happy. Other times I'd have a breakthrough. If we keep running away from ourselves, we're going to find ourselves running in circles around each other, and we're going to find ourselves pushing and perpetuating stereotypes. Because it's very hard to sit in silence with yourself, by the way. It's very hard to recognize your toxic traits, but yet, in order to self-actualize and to come to the place where you can be in a room and honestly be convinced that you belong there, you need to start with yourself. So the answer to your question is two-pronged. One, as a news anchor, you interact with a lot of issues. Menstrual inequality for me was mind-blowing. I'd never seen that before. Yes. Maybe I had heard of it in certain spaces, but to hear that girls were using, chicken feathers and goat hide to manage their period, it blew my mind, and that was in 2013. And I've never been the same person since that story, because I brought it onto my show, Monday Special, at the time. Yes. And so period poverty became a very big national conversation, and it shows you the importance of mainstreaming social justice issues. Because the COO at the time was a woman, she said, we're going to talk about periods on primetime news. It was a war in the newsroom. Men were like, we're going to talk about what? Yeah. And she said, we're going to talk about periods, because women and girls in my village are struggling. It changed the narrative. I think after that, the menstrual hygiene policy started being developed. There was a budget allocation that was upped, Yes. And then for me, the conviction to start a foundation, which essentially was supposed to intervene. And then it's grown, because we realized a lot of the girls and women we were walking with were also carrying the burdens that we're talking about today. I was mentioning back there in the room that one of the things and one of the reasons we're doing a lot of work in survivors of gender-based violence is that in 2021, this year, earlier, we went and were speaking to a group of young girls in their 20s, and one of them was saying she believed that when she was being physically assaulted by her boyfriend, it meant he loves her. That's what she believed. This is somebody in her mid-20s. And she said, my friends and I carried that belief with us, that when you're hit or punched or shoved because he's mad at you, one is you've done something wrong, and two is that's how he shows he loves me. So when you think about how much unlearning that women and men need to have in order for us to have progressive conversations like this, the task is massive. People need to roll up their sleeves and do the work, and then it doesn't rest with us. It rests with everyone here. Being in the space more and more, you realize that everybody has a role, even if it means checking yourself when you make a sexist comment, even if it means on a dinner table, you're having a conversation with your family around gender equality or gender-based violence and all of that, because if 1 in 3 women are affected, it means that somebody close to you, every other next person close to you is affected. And what does that do? It's another way of silencing you, because it's about power, right? It's about saying, I'm going to assault you or exert this physical pain on you so that you can keep quiet and reduce yourself in that corner. So all of these are very out there aggressions and microaggressions, like she mentioned, the quiet way in which you're forced to be in your corner. So I think when you hear be quiet, it doesn't mean you have to be silent. There's a distinction. And if you want to speak, you can speak even if it means your voice will shake. Yes. Because the burden of leadership as a woman, it's a day-to-day. You're constantly facing people. Are you sure you belong here? Are you sure you know what you're saying? And in as much as we can have different ways of leading, whether it's full on, whether it's quiet, it doesn't mean you should be silent. So don't equate quiet with silence. And for me, I think going into the next phase of my life, I don't know how to be silent anymore.
Yes.
I don't.
Yeah.
Because if you're silent, you're complicit, right?
Yeah.
You're complicit in a lot of the issues that are around you. And so it's the next phase of being very open and vocal about everything I've been working on for the last few years through my foundation.
Yes.
The last year has now allowed me to put that on the national and global stage. And I do not take for granted the space I occupy.
Yes.
I was telling her backstage that she doesn't understand that seeing women like her, or like all of us, it makes a difference when you're able to sit and see somebody. It's giving you permission to occupy a space.
Yes.
And so even here in the congregation, wherever you are in whichever small way, don't undermine the permission you're giving somebody else to occupy a space, right?
Yes.
And so that's now my new validation, is that I want people to understand that I didn't wake up and find myself on this stage. I worked so hard.
Yes.
I had to work so hard to unlearn certain things I believed about myself. I'm glad I have parents who are also very supportive, but there's many times that I wanted out. But then, what are you saying then to others?
Yes.
You're saying you don't have permission to come here.
Yes.
But we are here to say you do.
Yeah.
And we're here to say if we have come this far in whichever wars we've fought, you have permission. The doors are open. You now have permission to go through and do that.
Yes.
And so, as I wind up that answer, the first one was interacting with the issue, and the second one was just knowing that this is a space to occupy, to impact change. And so when I see that we've reached 15 million people online through the work we've done over the last few years, 4 million alone this year,
Yes.
hundreds. We have a center in Korogosho where we're now empowering girls and women, the community at large, but girls and women to have access to products and economic empowerment. It means that whatever we're doing as we sit on these chairs, there's impact being made there. So do not ever undermine the space that you occupy. Do not ever undermine the space you occupy and what you can do with it.
Yes, yes. People are clapping because they relate with everything that you ladies have said. And one of the things I like that Janet has said is, do not be silent. That's actually note to self. I will not be silent. And we're giving you also an opportunity. Don't be silent. Please engage in this conversation. There is a number on the screen. Use that number to send in your questions. I will be asking your questions, and I will ask the panel to answer some of those questions. And you can begin sending them from right now. There's a question, in fact, Janet, I want to also celebrate women. You said then there was a female boss. Would that be CS Farida? We celebrate her. we celebrate her, because also working in a newsroom, those were stories that you would not even bring up that topic in an editorial meeting. And most of the times, the boss and everyone else is male. So a topic like that would never come up. But for all of you ladies here, seated here, who are celebrated, there's a line that women and men use on you a lot. And they say strong woman, and they do it in a subtle way that sometimes sounds like it's a bad thing. She's a strong woman, she'll never get married, she's not married because she's a strong woman, and many other comments which I have received over the years. I'll start with you, Honorable Martha, because your name is Iron Lady. Why do we come up with such names? Is there something that makes people afraid of a woman who is, as Janet said, occupying her space?
I think it's a mixture of things.
Yes.
Because a strong man will never be called an iron man.
That's true.
So where does the iron woman come from?
Yes.
And is it a denial that women can be strong? Yet you've been raised by a mother. You have seen people in your village, women in your village. Women may be quiet, not silent. I like the distinction Janet has come up with. Because even that woman who hardly talks, you have seen their resilience, their strength. In very difficult circumstances, raising families, putting food on the table. managing that shoestring budget to make things run. If that is not strength, I do not know what is. So society knows that women are strong. But because we are supposed to be strong in the home, when we step into public space, they want us to go under the radar. So there is failure to acknowledge the strength of women collectively. And therefore, if a woman shows strength in the public space, she will then get names, such as I did. I just adopt the attitude that there's no name that can suppress the growth of a child.
Yes.
We say that in Kikuyu.
Yes.
So you take all the names and you go on, because I don't have time to sit and debate the labels that I'm given.
Yes.
I have time to keep going. I don't want to ever look back like Lot's wife, lest I become a stone. I want to keep going. So I think this is a denial of the strength and the resilience of women, which we see and we interact with every day. Even in the community, when you have projects, who shows up more and faster? It's the women, right from the schools, the churches, everywhere. But we are there to be seen, not to be acknowledged. But because we are now, I'm very, very impressed by Nairobi Chapel. This is the second time I'm doing this here. The fact that you're bringing this conversation to a place of worship, the fact that you're paying attention to this conversation will help us change society, because we must go home and interrogate, how are we raising our daughters, our sons? Are we raising them to be better than we have been, so that they have less unlearning than we have been? Because if you are raised not to acknowledge yourself, then you may never reach your potential. We are suppressing our God-given talent in this country, which resides in all of us, irrespective of gender. I value this conversation, and therefore that failure to acknowledge the strength of women will become less and less. And I hope that I'll live to see a day when even in the media, the description of women leaders and male leaders will be at par without any negative connotation. Notice that even in the pictures they will give of women and men, we all have different poses. They'll look for better pictures for the men. If it is women, unless if you have someone doing the PR for you, they'll give the worst. They think what they think is the worst. Some of us are so hardened. It really doesn't matter. Nothing can change who I am. I'll remain who I am. My duty is to affirm myself every day and to affirm others around me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll just mix what the two of them said. I liked what Honorable Martha Karua said, that all the name calling will not suppress. Something that Janet brought up, my purpose. That can never suppress your purpose. Let me come to you and get your take also, Reverend Faith, about this matter.
I'd like to share from a place that I've been very intensely involved with, particularly since lockdown of this year. And that has been the place of marriages. My husband and I have had the special privilege of working with actually many couples who, and we all know that the dynamics of marriage changed when the doors were locked and then the two of you now sat in the house together. And suddenly all the issues we're talking about that came out of that, the gender-based violence, the depression, suicidal tendencies, etc., became a trend for our country, actually for the globe at large, but generally for our country. And we've had so many sessions in our living room with couples that have struggled. And I can tell you one of the things that has been very apparent is the place of securing the male. Because in my conversations, I've realized a person who is secure is able to affirm, to release the other person to be their best potential, to celebrate them, because you know your space and no one else can take your space. So in those conversations, one of the things that took me into an event that I had gone to, my husband and I went to a Zawadi Africa Foundation. Zawadi Africa Foundation is Dr. Susan Mboya's baby child. And what she has done is get young girls from the village, like literally Samburu, Moyale, I mean the farthest part of this nation. And then when they do well in their Form 4 and have done well, she puts them in platforms of really high-level university colleges across the globe. Okay, sends them to the UK, sends them to the US. A lot like what her dad did with the airlift of the 60s. So she's tried to do that for the girls in the remotest part of this nation where just given the opportunity, they'll be able to do well. So we went for our fundraiser many years back, and it was very impressionable for me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We went to this fundraiser, and the guest of honor was Ambassador Bethel Kiplagat. Just an amazing man who's affirmed these conversations in his own space. He's passed on since, but it was such a monumental space because we'd see girl after girl come up and say, this was my village, this was where I come from. They'd show a video of her, and then she'd come up and with confidence just speak with a polished accent about her future, her hope for our nation. She's at Yale. This is what she's coming back to do for Kenya. She's studying microbiology and aeronautical engineering, etc. And there was girl after girl who came up on that stage. And then they'd have some of the girls who they had just recruited who would come up and, of course, would be shy, didn't know what to say. But it was very clear that there was a journey they were going to walk out of this opportunity. So when that whole presentation ended, Honorable Bethel Kiplagat came up on stage, and he said, I am so amazed that it only takes an opportunity to allow someone who cannot get that to unlock their potential. It just takes one person to speak into your life, whether you are a woman or a man, for someone to unlock your real potential. Then he said, I just have one question. Where are the husbands who are going to marry these women? Because of course they'll be threatened. Of course they're not there. And one of the things that I came to realize is in our desire to unlock those potentials, particularly with the girl child movement, which is a commendable movement, we forgot the girl child. And I went home and looked at my two sons, and I said, what can I do so that you're not deficient in where God has called you in your destiny as a man? That you will unlock the potential of other women and other men. That you'll realize you don't have to deny yourself or shortchange yourself so that someone else can use your shoulders to get to the place that God has called them to. And it's been a conversation I've been having with my sons over and over again, that you're a door opener, that you're an affirmer, because first and foremost, you need to be secure in who you are, in the place God has called you, because he has called you by your name. And the plans he has for you are yours. They're your blueprint. No one can take those away. And so you don't need to be a particular way around other people who perhaps make you feel threatened. Go and resolve that with yourself. Or perhaps want to take away or snatch away from what is yours because they are insecure. Use that space to be vocal, to perhaps even affirm them from their insecurities. And it's a conversation that has really, really changed how we have raised our sons. My own conversation with my husband, which half the time, when I go into a preaching session or a church that I'm visiting, they all want to know if he's a bishop or he's a senior pastor, because I can only be a pastor if my husband is a pastor. And so they don't know what to do with the fact that he's not. They're like, and he's given you permission to do this. I just found that very interesting. But as society, it's a place, I think we've had that narrative over and over, trying to correct what society has shortchanged. Some of that we have done with our own wisdom, and it has sort of unbalanced us in a way. And so I'm hoping these conversations will begin to ask, where is a place to celebrate amazing gender positions that don't need to be, you don't have to stereotype and dismiss one gender against the other, because we are all affirmed by who God created us to be.
Yes. Thank you. We are all affirmed. So questions are now coming in fast and furious. I can just see on my phone. And a lot of you, so one question is asking, so from 1 Timothy, some leaders, preachers persist that it means women should not preach or be leaders as they are commanded to be submissive. And in leadership is seen as a role for men. What's your take, Reverend?
Maybe we can go over there first. What's my thought about that? One of the things, and we're going to hear that towards the end of this service, is that that particular verse has been taken out of context.
Yes.
Like any verse that creates cults or movements or stuff where you're stuck in that thought. The truth about Scripture is that there's not one part that dismisses the rest. Everything is heard in tandem. And like I said, that particular verse has even created division within the global church, where there are those who see women as leaders and those who don't see women as in leadership. And so part of our conversation today is ask, what is the truth of God's word? Well, we affirm that verse as Paul's presence. Can we understand its context? Can we understand what he meant? And then can we find other verses that would affirm differently? So that we are all of us, as we walk out today, need to go back to the truth of God's word to ask, if I'm going to change my opinion about being complementarian or egalitarian, I need to have a personal conviction. If I have believed that this is what Paul has said, and that he said this, and therefore it is the truth, what other scriptures, or what did Jesus himself say, or can the Holy Spirit give me an insight? And where is the place of transforming, or even taking that stand and saying, maybe this is just the truth? And then beginning to also say, if it is indeed the truth that women should not be in spiritual leadership, or leadership per se, where does that leave us as a society? What are the deficiencies we will have if as a man I choose not to allow my daughters, my sisters, to reach their God-given potential? What is our loss for us as a society and as a community? Because if we listen to some of those things and then choose to live life a different way, I can tell you, any place where there is bias, there is always a deficiency, a deficit, where someone is oppressed, and we've seen that in the Black Lives Matter space, in places where there is religious intolerance, someone always loses out. And the question is to ask, is this what God intended for us? Where he says you should love your neighbors, you should love yourself. Or when he said that the greatest of this is love, because that position is not a love position.
Yes, that's true. Let me take another question where it says, good morning, great discussion, attending online. I have come to realize that women are also our own enemy. How has that affected the women on the panel, where you find that as a leader you also don't have the support of other women, or in an organization, women bosses sometimes are not supportive? Janet, if you could please answer that question.
Yeah, I also tend to get that question a fair bit.
Yes.
I think if I'm to answer it on the surface, I would say at the time I was in media, unless it was just a stroke of luck, we were just incredibly lucky to have men and women who supported us. I was, I think, among the first crop of anchors in 2007 that were relatively young. I mean, I was anchoring news at 23, and I remember they believed in me more than I believed in myself, by the way. Yeah. Beatrice Marshall, Njoroge Mwaura, all these icons of industry, and Farida as well, and they said, you're going to read news. I said, I don't think so. They said, why? I said, I'm 23. What am I saying to the country? And they said, why are you invalidating what we see in you?
Yes.
And so that kind of allowed us to be, we were mentored and coached into it, and the same when I moved elsewhere. But I think it speaks to what has been said a fair bit on this panel, which is patriarchy by extension, which women and men take up, right? In fact, there's a term I've heard being used for women who are patriarchal. They're called patriarchal princesses, yes. Or something, because you're drinking the Kool-Aid of patriarchy. You firmly believe that a woman shouldn't be there. A friend of mine once told me, when you want to move forward in life and there's a lot of roadblocks, one of the best things you can do is be undeniable. And I think that's also something, because there's a question, I think, at the end when I saw the prep, which says, what do we say to the next generation of leaders?
Yes.
The answers sometimes seem so trivial and simple, but being undeniable means do the work and work hard. Because who can take away what you bring to the table if you've rolled up your sleeves and come, and come out strong? So being undeniable also helped me push back in times when I could see that somebody, even a woman, didn't want me to occupy a space.
Yes.
There's times I'd go to work and find that somebody had been put in the chair that I was supposed to be reading in. Honestly, and it was for whatever reason they had, whether they favored somebody over me. Sometimes it was a female producer, sometimes it was a male editor, and they favored, at that point, somebody for some reason. So being undeniable, pushing back, I think a lot of the time we also undermine the power of reporting, and I know we get scared because people have reported sexual assault, etc., and had to leave their jobs.
Yes.
But I found in my experience, reporting and being undeniable, those tools and answers which may seem so obvious and trivial, they make a difference, but it still goes back to knowing yourself.
Yes.
It still goes back to knowing, what do I bring to the table? There's many spaces I've entered. There's a time I was on a call during COVID with some serious global leaders.
Yes.
And I had a panic attack. I think I was telling Ashley, my colleague who's here. And so there's times like that when I have to remind myself, but Janet, what do you know for sure? What do you bring to the table? You've worked hard, you know the information. It may sound like a very meh answer, but you have to go back to the undeniable factor you bring. And you can't bring undeniability if you had to either pay your way to the top or, I don't know, find other ways.
Yes.
It's through hard work.
Yes.
And so by the time the screens came on and all these people were zooming in, I was able to answer with conviction because of the undeniability of the hard work, the sweat and blood of all the work that I've done over the years, and say, I have permission to be here, And yes, whether or not it's women or men who push you to the side, you be undeniable, you bring your best self, and you continue to also use the law and the policies in that workspace to report when you genuinely feel like you're being sidelined for a certain reason. Let us not be silent.
Yes.
Silent is complicit. It is hurting so many people, men and women, because you're saying, my voice doesn't matter, I can't talk. And I always say, speak even if your voice shakes. Even if it's trembling and you're scared, speak. I feel like I've answered 3 different questions. I've gone like this. But
I like that you've repeated again, speaking, and openly shared that as much as you're well known and you're celebrated all over the world, there are times you still have to remind yourself what your purpose is. Let me ask the last question, and unfortunately we've run out of time, but remember we do have a discussion on, I think even this coming Friday, the next month, Q&A, and these are some of the questions that we will be responding to. But let me ask one question, and that will be for you, Honorable, from John Paul, who says, amazing discussion. How can we grow and nurture genuine and sincere male feminists? I ask this because we have 3 daughters and would love to support the girl child.
How can we nurture?
Yes.
I think it's just opening the doors for each child to grow to their full potential, accepting their choices and guiding them where guidance is needed. And also preparing them to affirm themselves every morning, because when they go out into the world, you are not in control. They'll get comments, they'll get indication that their worth is not what they think, but if they are confident, because raising confident children, really that's all about affirming them.
Yes.
Then they'll be able to go out there and fight it out for themselves. And we have examples in our homes. My grandmother, Patano, was a graduate of the social school, not the formal school.
Yes.
But she really occupied her space, and she really safeguarded her space. As an adult now, when I look back, I see that I learned so much from her, and from the stories she gave me about her life. And she had such an impact. Because today when you ask who your role model is, we look for people who are generally known. But the people who really impact you is initially as you grow up. It could be people in the neighborhood, in the homestead. It could be your parents, because even my parents had influence, a lot of influence on me, and I see a piece of them in me. I think that it's about how we raise, and we've got to be sensitive that we do not put fear or doubts, sow seeds of doubt, self-doubt in our children as we raise them. It could just be what you think is an innocent comment. You may be upset and you throw that word at your child. It's something we just have to check ourselves all the time and see that we increase the confidence of our children, both boys and girls, so that each child can grow to their full potential. And how we raise our boys so that the influence outside there doesn't tell them being a man is being mean to women or oppressing women, so that they also come up growing in inequality. We have countries in the world where women now are over 50 in parliament, like Rwanda. The Scandinavian countries are almost 50-50, South Africa, but in real life, none of those countries has achieved actual equality in everyday life. In the Scandinavian, it may be a little better. So it means that it's a work in progress. We have to keep working. And hope the next generation will do better. If you allow me, I just want to comment a little on women are their worst enemies. That's a narrative pushed forward to again make us doubt ourselves. There will be women who oppose women. And even women who are not patriarchal, 100%, they can't agree with my views because we are not homogeneous. Even men don't agree with each other 100%. Even in our homes, we don't agree, even with our siblings and sometimes our parents. That doesn't mean they are your enemies. So this is a narrative we should not believe in. As a person who has sought elective position, I have found nothing but support from a majority of women. But there have been a few very vocal, very vicious, so you can mistake them for every woman. I've been supported by so many men, and I have been opposed viciously by some. That doesn't make every man, every woman. So let's not fear our fellow women that they are our enemies. Let's go out there to embrace, to convince everyone that the cause we are putting forward is a worthy cause. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. And for our panelists, thank you. I wish we had more time. But I want to say thank you so much for being vulnerable. You're public figures, and sometimes when you share some information, other stories come up. But you have been so open with us and so vulnerable, giving us real examples and how you've been able to overcome. Janet, you'd like to say?
One, I know, it's so bad as a moderator, like, please don't say anything. But I think it's important as a call to action for the audience and congregation. And again, it might seem like an odd exercise, but I'd like everybody to go home today, and whether they're speaking to each other as family, as spouses, as children, I'd like them to ask the next person, what space do you believe you occupy, and am I helping you or hurting you to occupy that space? And vice versa. Because again, sometimes we're afraid to confront that. So it's a very simple exercise. Somebody might be saying, I feel like I wanted to continue school, but I'm not sure you support me. Somebody might say, I feel like as your husband, you don't affirm or validate me enough. Whatever it is, if we're going to start to normalize these conversations up here, we need to normalize them in our homes. So I just wanted to mention that as a call to action for everyone, which is just, am I helping you or am I hurting you? Because oppression, again, goes both ways, like what she said, men and women. It shouldn't be blanket condemnation. But if we don't get it right within ourselves with the people we love the most, out there we're scared to shine. So am I helping you or am I hurting you? Move towards the space that you believe you can occupy. I think that's an exercise everybody should take up.
Thank you so much. We are now going to get into the next phase, but a round of applause, and let's honor Our panelists, you can now take your seat.